The story that you are about to hear is a compilation of documented true facts, featuring characters, events, or places that has played a role in shaping history. Please sit back and listen as I recite this narrative for you. Before I begin this narration, let me apologize in advance for any mispronounced words. If you hear a word I mispronounced and you know how to say it properly, please feel free to comment below. Thank you for understanding. Friedrich Heinrich Karl Fritz Haarmann was a German serial killer known as the Butcher of Hanover, the Vampire of Hanover, and the Wolfman, who committed the sexual assault, murder, mutilation, and dismemberment of at least 24 boys and young men between 1918 and 1924 in Hanover, Germany. Fritz Haarmann was born on October 25, 1879, the sixth and youngest child of Johanna and Ole Haarmann. Fritz was a quiet child, with few friends his own age or sex and who seldom socialized with any children other than his siblings outside of school. From an early age, Haarmann's behavior was noticeably effeminate. He loved playing with dolls, wearing dresses, and avoiding other children, especially boys. In 1886, Haarmann began his schooling, where he was noted by teachers to be a spoiled and mollycoddled child who was prone to daydreaming. Although his behavior at school was noted to be exemplary, his academic performance was below average, and Haarmann had to repeat a school year twice. On one occasion, when he was about 8 years old, Haarmann was molested by one of his teachers, although he never discussed this incident in detail. At the age of 16, in an effort to force their son to toughen up, Haarmann was enrolled in a military academy in the southern German city of Breisach. Although the boy enjoyed his time there, after just a few months at school, he discovered that he had epilepsy and also suffered from seizures and was discharged for medical reasons. Haarmann returned to Hanover and took employment in a cigar factory for a year before committing his first crime, sexually molesting young boys. He was first arrested for committing offenses of this nature in July 1896. Captured and charged by the police, he was consigned to a mental asylum. After just 6 months in the asylum, he escaped and crossed the border to Switzerland. There, he lived with a relative of his mother and obtained employment as a handyman in a shipyard. Haarmann remained in Zurich for 16 months before he returned to Hanover in April 1899. Early the following year, he became engaged to a woman named Erna Lowert, who soon became pregnant with his child. She soon ended the engagement because he accused her of having an affair with a student. In October 1900, Haarmann received notification to perform his compulsory military service, but due to his epilepsy and probable mental illness, Haarmann was hospitalized for 4 months in 1901 and dismissed from the military in 1902. He was awarded a full military pension, which increased in 1904 when he was finally classed as disabled. He returned to live with his family and took employment in the small business his father had established. For the next decade, Haarmann lived as a petty thief, burglar, and conman. Although he did occasionally obtain legitimate employment, he invariably stole from his employers or their customers. He was frequently arrested and served several short prison sentences. He gradually began to establish a relationship with Hanover police as an informer, largely as a means of redirecting the attention of the police from himself, and later admitted that the police began to view him as a reliable source of information regarding Hanover's criminal network. In 1914, Haarmann was convicted of a series of thefts and frauds and was imprisoned just as the First World War began. Upon his release in 1918, he was struck by the poverty of the German nation as a result of the loss the nation had suffered in the Great War. The country was bankrupt. Fritz Haarmann immediately reverted to the criminal life he had lived before he was arrested in 1914. Despite police knowledge that Haarmann was both a known criminal and a known homosexual, then illegal and punishable by imprisonment in Germany, by 1919, with the cooperation of several police officials, Haarmann devised a ruse where he would offer to fence or store stolen property at his premises, then pass this information to police, who would then raid his property at agreed times and arrest these contacts. To remove any suspicions as to his treachery reaching the criminal fraternity, Haarmann himself would be arrested in these raids. Moreover, on numerous occasions, he is known to have performed citizens' arrests upon commuters for offenses such as traveling on forged documents. As a result of these activities, police began to rely on Haarmann as a reliable source of information regarding various criminal activities in the city, and he was allowed to patrol Hanover station largely at will. From 1918 to 1924, Haarmann committed at least 24 murders, although he is suspected of murdering a minimum of 27. All of Haarmann's victims were males between the ages of 10 and 22, the majority of whom were in their mid to late teens and largely consisted of young male commuters, runaways, and occasionally male prostitutes. The victims were lured back to one of the three addresses in which Haarmann is known to have resided throughout those years. He is known to have killed upon the promise of assistance, accommodation, work, or under the pretense of arrest. At Haarmann's apartment, the victim was typically given food and drink before Haarmann bit into his Adam's apple, often as he was strangled. Often, this caused the victim to die of asphyxiation, but on several occasions, Haarmann bit completely through his victim's Adam's apple and trachea, sometimes while sodomizing them. All his victims were dismembered before they were discarded, usually in the river Lane. Haarmann's first known victim was a 17-year-old youth named Friedel Roth. When he disappeared, his friends told police he was last seen with Fritz Haarmann. Under pressure from Roth's family, police raided Haarmann's apartment, where they were dismayed to find their informer in the company of a 13-year-old semi-naked boy, but no sign of Friedel. All they could do under the laws of the time was arrest Haarmann for indecency with a minor. Released after serving 9 months, Haarmann quickly reverted to the same lifestyle he led before his arrest. Again, he regained the trust of the police and became an informer. The possessions of several victims were either sold on the black market or retained by either Haarmann or his lover, Hans Grantz. However, the personal possessions of some victims were sold to legitimate retailers. In several instances, both Haarmann and Grantz gave possessions belonging to various victims to acquaintances as gifts. Rumor had it that Haarmann would also peddle meat from the bodies of his victims as canned black market pork, although there was never physical evidence to confirm this. Haarmann was eventually apprehended when numerous skeletal remains, which he had dumped into the river Lane, washed up downstream in May and June 1924. The police decided to drag the river and discovered more than 500 human bones, which were later confirmed as having come from at least 22 separate human individuals. Suspicion quickly fell upon Haarmann, who had convictions for molesting children and had been connected to the disappearance of Friedel Roth in 1918. Due to his status as a favorite informant, the Hanover police were deemed unfit to investigate him. So, 2 detectives from Berlin arrived on the scene to take over the investigation. The Berlin detectives soon found Haarmann in a dark corner of the train station attacking a teenager. He was thrown in jail while they went to search his apartment much more thoroughly this time. Inside was a nightmarish scene. The walls and floor were stained all over with blood, and more than 100 pieces of victims' clothing were found. Haarmann tried to explain this as a byproduct of his illegal trade as a butcher. However, clothing and personal items known to be possessions of several missing youths were also found in his home. Two former tenants informed police that in the spring of 1924, they had discreetly followed Haarmann from his apartment and observed him discarding a heavy sack into the Lane River. Under interrogation, Haarmann quickly confessed to raping, killing, and butchering young men since 1918. When asked how many he had killed, Haarmann claimed somewhere between 50 and 70. The police, however, could only connect Haarmann with the disappearance of 27 youths, and he was charged with 27 murders. In court, Haarmann smoked cigars and insulted everyone present. Once, looking at a photo of one missing boy, he shouted at the boy's grieving father that he could never have had anything to do with the child as he was far too ugly. According to Haarmann, he never actually intended to murder any of his victims, but would be seized with an irresistible urge to bite into or through their Adam's apple, often as he manually strangled them in throes of ecstasy before typically collapsing atop the victim's body. All of Haarmann's victims' bodies were disposed of via dismemberment shortly after their murder, and Haarmann was insistent that he found the act of dismemberment extremely unpleasant. He had, he stated, been ill for 8 days after his first murder. On August 16, 1924, Haarmann underwent a psychological examination at a Göttingen medical school. On September 25, he was judged competent to stand trial and returned to Hanover to await trial. The trial of Fritz Haarmann and Hans Granz began on December 4, 1924. Haarmann was charged with the murder of 27 boys and young men who had disappeared between September 1918 and June 1924. In 14 of these cases, Haarmann, who insisted upon conducting his own defense, acknowledged his guilt, although he claimed to be uncertain of the identification of the remaining 13 victims upon the list of charges. Granz pleaded not guilty to charges of being an accessory to murder in several of the murders. The trial was very spectacular. It was one of the first major media events in Germany. The term serial killer had not yet been coined, and the public and press were lost for words to describe the case. The press referred to him by such titles as the Butcher of Hanover, the Vampire of Hanover, and the Wolfman. Apart from the cruelty of what Haarmann had admittedly done, even more scandalous, shaking German society to the core, was the involvement of the police in the case. Haarmann was a police informant who frequently gave up other criminals to investigators until Haarmann was arrested. It had never occurred to the police that the serial killer they were looking for was well known to them and right under their noses, even though some of the victims were last seen in his company. The trial lasted barely 2 weeks. On December 19, Haarmann was found guilty of 24 of the 27 murders and sentenced to death. He was acquitted of 3 murders which he denied, even though the personal possessions of the boys were either in his possession or acquaintances of his at the time of his arrest. Granz was initially found guilty of enticement to murder in the case of Adolf Hannapel, an apprentice who vanished from Hanover's railway station on November 11, 1923. Witnesses had seen Granz in the company of Haarmann, pointing to Hannapel. Haarmann claimed this was one of 2 murders committed upon the insistence of Granz, and for this reason, Granz was sentenced to death. The discovery of a letter from Haarmann declaring Granz's innocence later led to a second trial and a 12-year prison sentence for Granz. After serving his time, Granz continued to live in Hanover until his death around 1980. The remains of Haarmann's victims, which had been recovered, were buried together in a communal grave in Stockener Cemetery in February 1925. In April 1928, a large granite memorial in the form of a triptych, inscribed with the names and ages of the victims, was erected over the communal grave. At 6 o'clock on the morning of April 15, 1925, Fritz Haarmann was beheaded by guillotine in the grounds of Hanover Prison. After his execution, Haarmann's head was preserved in a jar by scientists to examine the structure of his brain. Sections of his brain were removed for forensic analysis. An examination of slices of Haarmann's brain revealed traces of meningitis, although no sections of Haarmann's brains were permanently preserved. Nonetheless, Haarmann's head was preserved in formaldehyde and remained in the possession of the Göttingen Medical School from 1925 until 2014 when it was cremated. The murders committed by Haarmann stirred much discussion in Germany regarding methods used in police investigation, the treatment of mentally ill offenders, and the validity of the death penalty. However, the most heated topic of discussion in relation to the murders committed by Haarmann were issues relating to the subject of homosexuality, which was then illegal and punishable by imprisonment in Germany. With the lurid stories of Haarmann's sexual violence and Grant's sickening cruelty, a wave of homophobia swept through the country. As the hearts of most Germans hardened towards the plight of gay men, the path was cleared for the later campaign of murder against homosexuals carried out by the Nazis. Hey everyone! I just wanted to express how grateful I am that you took the time to listen to my narration. Hopefully you enjoyed it. I am Twysted Mind and please enjoy the rest of your day. Salamat!